evening, everybody. Welcome to another live episode of The Break. It's been a minute since we've done one of these. We had the live show up in Edmonton, which was an absolute blast. Thank you so much to everybody who came out for that. Big thank you to all of the guests who showed up. Our panel, it's amazing folks there. Gonna have some amazing conversations with some of those folks over the coming weeks as we go. But we got a lot to talk about because as we were trying to do all of the work to make the live show happen and go up to Edmonton and all of those things, Alberta Politics got nuttier somehow. It's the summer. Nothing's supposed to be happening right now. And yet here we are in the midst of the dumpster fire. So we're going to do our weekly roundup to try to make a little bit of sense of those things. All of that being said, let's get right into it with our first subject matter. So there's this coal mine. There's several coal mines. We've talked about coal mines quite a bit on the show, but there's this coal mine in particular that is in Grand Cache. Now, there's a couple things you got to know about this coal mine. There's a few things that you got to know about this coal mine. The first one is Grand Cache is a community that by most estimations is a community that was built around coal mining. So it's kind of built into the town's DNA, history, all of that. And they unfortunately don't seem to have a whole lot of dinosaur fossils that they can parlay into a tourism industry. So they're kind of committed in many ways to the coal. It's a big part of their economy when it's working. The mine that we're talking about is the Summit 14 mine. Now, this is a mine that has been in on again, off again status since it was originally proposed in 2007. And there's a bunch of things that have happened in that time period. The ownership has changed hands. There's been a lot of corporate shell games that have gone on, but most recently a company called Summit Coal Incorporated took over the project and has been pushing forward to make that project a reality. But it gets even weirder because Summit is related to another company called Valerie Resources. Valerie Resources, those is the one who kind of owns the things, and they're the ones who are really, really pushing for it. This is important background. And Summit's a weird company because it's technically a Canadian company, but much like another Canadian company, Northback, it's a Canadian company in that it's registered in Canada, but it's most of its leadership and most of its money trace back to Australia. And that's my best shot at an Australian accent. It's not very good. But getting into the mine proposal, there's no doubt that the mine has its support in its community. And there's a few other groups, there's a few Indigenous groups that have said, hey, yeah, no, we think this mine might potentially be a good thing. But there are some environmental implications, and there's certainly some environmental concerns. Now, there's a couple of groups that in particular that have stepped forward with concerns about the environmental impact. One of them is the Alberta Wilderness Association, and the other one is the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society. Now, the way that these things are supposed to traditionally have always up until this point in time worked is when there's a little bit of contention over whether or not a major project should go ahead, there's a hearing that happens. And generally speaking, there's a public hearing that happens. You've probably, if you've been paying any attention to the Northback, Grassy Mountain, Eastern Slopes stuff, you've probably heard of some hearings that happened. Now, there's a lot of people who have said, I'm not sure how much weight I put in those hearings. It seems like they were kind of forced. It seems like the fix may have been in. A lot of different reasons to feel that way for sure. But there was a public hearing that was supposed to be held. And yes, I'm speaking in the past tense for a reason. A joint statement from the good folks at the Calgary Parks and Wilderness Society and Alberta Wilderness Association issued a statement earlier this week. Since day one, Summit has been adversarial to the public hearing and AAR's processes, requesting the AAR reverse their decision, dismiss concerns, expedite timelines, and limit the scope of public participation. When the AAR repeatedly requested these requests, Summit sent a letter to the Minister of Education the Minister of Energy, we'll get to the Minister of Education later, accusing the AR of delaying jobs in Grand Cache and construction of Mine 14 by holding a public hearing. Someone complained that they were concerned and disappointed with Alberta's regulatory processes and requested a meeting sidestepping what is meant to be an independent and public process. So it's very, very clear. We've got coal company. They want to go ahead and get to the coal in. They want to coal very badly in Australian. I don't know. And they felt that the regulatory process, the public hearings, were going to take too long. It was going to slow down. They wanted to get to that sweet coal as quickly as they could. So they sent a letter. This letter was sent to Brian Jean. And there's a couple of things that we just got to tease out of this letter really quick because there's a lot going on here. The good folks at Valerie, who are the parent company of all of this, they had some thoughts about the folks at CPAWS. It's quite the read. The president of Valerie Resources argued that decision by the AER's hearing commissioners should never have been agreed to. And the AAR's commissioners should never have agreed to hear from CPAWS and AWA. Now, it's important to realize even the hearing commissioners stated that they expected AWA and CPAWS to provide information at the hearing that can assist us in reaching our decision. From the letter, these environmental advocacy organizations have no expertise in metallurgical coal or underground mining and are biased against natural resource development. So the company that wants to do the coal would like very much for only people who support the project to have a voice in the whether or not the project should happen, and they don't believe that environmental groups should have any say, even though it could have significant environmental impact. But here's the thing: there's one other little piece that I want to highlight because here's the letter, and I want to just draw attention to the signature. This is the signature. For those of you that are listening to the audio version of this, it looks like not the letters of Brian McDonald, the president, but instead it looks like somebody just like rage signed the letter. It's pretty good, but he seems very angry. This Brian gentleman, which remember when the biggest import from Australia was beer and happy Australians. I miss those days. Anyways, on August 21st, with all of this in mind, and again, given the fact that the AAR hearing commissioners said, yes, we should have a public hearing, and yes, CPAWS and AWA should speak to it, because, and again, I'm going to read from the notes. AWA and CPAWS could provide information at the hearing that could assist us in reaching our decision. That is the letter quoting the AER's own hearing commissioners. So the folks that are in charge of making the decision were saying, yes, we would like to have a public hearing very much, and we would like to hear from these two groups very much. If we could do that, we would like to do that, please. But on August 21st, the AER CEO, Rob Morgan, decided to skip the public hearing in a decision that even he called without precedent. So, let's just recap. There's a coal project. It's in an area where there are some folks who like the coal. There are two environmental organizations that have said we have some concerns about the potential environmental impact of this project. Please, AAR, may we talk to you? The folks in charge of the decision at the AAR said, yes, we would like very much to hear from you. We believe that you have information that could potentially influence our decision. And then the president of the coal company wrote to Brian Jean and said, I don't like this at all, and I sign my name. And then all of a sudden, the president of the AAR decides there shall be no hearing. I'm going to use my power as the president of the AAR and just say no hearing. We're just going to move on and go from there. It'll be fine, which is concerning because it's not like Brian Jean has a history of making, I don't know, public statements that could potentially be used in court that have tremendous impacts on environmental projects. It's not like Brian Sheen's ever written to the AER and said, "Hey, these projects, I really think that they should go ahead. In my legal opinion, as the Minister of Energy." It's not like it's not like those things have ever happened before. They have. That was what was just on the screen. He's done it several times now. So the faith in the AAR, the Alberta Energy Regulator, has taken a little bit of a hit because people are very concerned about the environmental impacts, and these two environmental organizations have been now shut out of the process. But speaking of environmental impacts and water usage, new policy came forth from the government of Alberta this week. A 2%, the AI question. So Danielle Smith, she's got this buddy, Kevin O'Leary. They really want to do big AI centers. They want to build huge complexes that use tremendous amounts of energy, all kinds of electricity, all kinds of water for the cooling of these massive complexes. And there's people who have said, oh, well, we have these electricity shortage problems that we keep running into. We don't like those. And we're a little concerned about the water. So maybe this is not the best idea. Maybe we could find something else to do. Danielle Smith, her buddy Kevin O'Leary, they hang out together at Mar-a-Lago with Donald Trump. I wish I was making that up, but I'm not. They want to build the data centers. But Albertans are like, hey, we want to get some money out of this. If we're going to be letting these giant data centers build power plants or use our electricity and use our water, then we'd like to see a little bit of return on investment if we could, please. And the Alberta government this week announced what that return on investment was going to be. It's a 2% levy on computer equipment, and it will be offset by credits on income tax. So it's a net zero. It's a net zero project in the worst way possible. For anybody who's unfamiliar with what a levy is, basically it's like when a company wants to import something and buy it, the government says, "Oh, we're going to charge you a little bit of extra for that." So there's probably another word that might be more familiar for a lot of folks: tariff. It's basically a tariff on computer equipment, but all of the money that these companies have to spend on that tariff for computer equipment is then offset because they can use it as an Alberta income tax write-off. So there's no money coming in from these things from there. That's fun. This is almost as if there's some people who want to make the maximal amount of money who hang out with the Premier of Alberta at fancy resorts or something. I don't know. Moving on from there, we got to talk about this guy for a second. And I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce the name. Is it Sean Fiucht? Because phonetically, that's kind of looks like Sean Fiucht, but it's not. And I want to start off by framing this conversation appropriately, because there's a lot of folks who have said, "Oh, if you're going to talk about Sean, if you're going to talk about that Sean Fiucht guy, you're just hating Christians." And while that may be true for some folks, I don't know. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's not the primary concern for a lot of people who are worried about Sean. Because Sean, as it turns out, he's got some problems. There's some challenges, and one of them is that's not actually Sean. That's not actually Sean Fiucht or Sean Fiucht right there. This is Sean Fiucht, but it was too good to pass up, so we had to do that. Visual joke. Again, I apologize to the audio audience. So let's get into this whole thing, because Sean Fiucht is the pastor, the worship leader who has been traveling Canada with the good folks from Rebel Media in tow. Absolutely not sensationalizing the fact that he has been denied permits or was denied permits in most self-respecting jurisdictions across Canada. And there was a very good job, very effective way of people saying, "Oh, that's not very good. You're just judging on the Christians. You don't want him performing because of he's such a good Christian." And Well, it gets to be a little problematic. And let's start with nobody's saying that Mr. Feucht is not a Christian. I'm not saying that. I believe that there's actually Bible verses about that sort of thing. So, given that we're wandering into the minefield of theology, I want to make sure that I'm on the right side of the fence. But there are some folks who have worked with Sean who had some concerns. There was actually a formal statement that had been issued by people who had been working with him in a number of different ministries, and to to take a couple of statements out of it. Based on the documented and corroborated nature of these concerns, we strongly urge that Sean Feucht be removed from positions of leadership and financial stewardship. The statement is made in good faith for the purpose of preventing further harm and upholding standards of biblical accountability, transparency, and justice. 1 Timothy 5:20 admonishes us to publicly share with a wider body when a leader is consistently confronted by their sin and does not repent nor change his ways, so that others may see the kindness of God in the life of the unrepentant, and so that others may take warning. To Sean's victims, their words, and those who are exposed to him via social media platforms and in-person events. We can't remain silent about the dangers of Sean's sin. So let's take a look at what their specific concerns were. They felt that there's a longstanding pattern of moral and ethical misconduct by Sean Feucht. Over many years, we have personally witnessed Sean choosing to engage in repeated and unrepentant behavior that includes manipulation, exaggeration, control, lying, gaslighting, and spiritual and emotional abuse. What else do they have concerns with Sean? Misrepresentation and abuse of power. Sean Feucht has consistently used his public platform to portray a persona inconsistent with his private conduct. He has misrepresented ministry activities by exaggeration and outright lies. Sean routinely oscillates between presenting himself as a victim and domineering others, depending on what benefits him most in a given moment. Sean routinely boasts in his own self-importance, often dealing in grandiose visions and promises, interacting with individuals around him as though they are only stepping stones to his next important mandate. We have consistently witnessed the ceaseless financial solicitation intermingled with those grandiose visions, which has led to untold financial gain and a steady stream of unpaid labor from volunteers. But that's not all. Apparently, Sean doesn't like when people say, "Hey, man, I'm not sure if what you're doing is cool." They had concerns about retaliation against whistleblowers and failure to address internal complaints. Individuals who attempted to raise concerns or confront misconduct have been met with retaliation, public defamation, exclusion from ministry involvement, and threats of litigation. This includes statements made by Feucht suggesting those who raised objections were no longer Christians or were politically motivated, accusations that are both defamatory and unsupported. But we're still not done. According to these good folks, he's got patterns of spiritual manipulation as well over time, patterns of manipulation and spiritual abuse. Sean made empty promises to leaders and volunteers, used shame and spiritual language to control leaders, diverted designated donations for personal or organizational use, employed scripture misuse and pressure tactics, engaged in emotionally abusive confrontations when questioned. Sean pressured pastors of local congregations to give him more money when he didn't find their offerings to his liking. So it seems like maybe Mr. Feucht, according to the words of the people who have worked with him, and some of these people worked with him just a couple of years ago, according to those folks, Mr. Feucht, he's maybe a little bit less focused on the Christianity element of his ministry and more focused on the what's in it for me. Now, that in and of itself should be disqualifying enough that any credible municipality would want to keep their distance from somebody who's got this documented history from people who have worked with him of predatory behavior. But just in case it's not enough, he's also got some thoughts on some things. Critics have cited Feucht's views on the LGBTQ2S+ community, which he has called a cult bent on perverting and destroying the innocence of every child they can. He's also got thoughts on abortion laws, which he said feverishly promote the slaughter of the unborn and the newborn. So, Mr. Feucht, that's going to be fun for a while, I think. I'm probably going to get an email about that one. Mr. Feucht is a problematic individual. He's definitely engaging in hate speech, and he's definitely a little bit on the side of the morally ambiguous, let's say, if he's if any of the claims that are made in those statements signed by those people who put their names to it and stand by it, if any of those claims are true, there's some problems here. And there's that in and of itself is and only should be the disqualifying reasons that any municipality, any level of government decided to use to say, hey, you know what? We're not going to let you use our facilities because our facilities are public facilities. They're meant for all of the people who live in our province, all of the people who call themselves Ontarians or Saskatchewanians or Albertans or British Columbians. That's just who we are. So you don't get to use the public place for that. If you'd like to rent a pub, by all means, go right ahead. Or perhaps some other facility that doesn't serve alcohol, I presume. But not the government of Alberta. The government of Alberta did approve Sean to play on the legislature grounds. They did issue a permit for him to play on the legislature grounds. Now, he was actually playing down the hill a little ways from the actual legislature, but there's some fine folks that showed up to share the stage because right there with the big goat horn sticking out of his mouth, do with that what you will. That's Archer Pulowski. Archer Pulowski, who was convicted of inciting mischief, I think it was, at the Coutts border. Archer Pulowski, who said that the floods in Calgary in 2013 were God's punishment for the gays. Archer Pulowski, who was involved in that whole thing with the phone call with Daniel Smith, trying to get him out of the conviction for the inciting the insurrection at Coutts. That's that dude in that picture sharing a stage with Sean Foyt. So we have some problems here. And the vernacular, even in the tweet, this is one of the tweets that we're going to refer to in tonight's show. Lions never lose sleep over the opinions of sheep. Now, I'm no expert, but I have this childhood memory of, I don't know, Jesus Christ being referred to as the Lamb of God, a baby sheep of God, and the shepherd. So I don't know why anyone would aspire to identify in a theologically Christian setting as a lion unless they were publicly just being like, oh yeah, no, I'm totally here to prey on the sheep. That's just me speculating. I can't say for sure by any stretch of the imagination. But that wasn't the only tweet that Mr. Foyt threw up. He also threw up this one. And this is where, as if what we said already wasn't bad enough, this is where the rubber really meets the road. Because this is a video of him tweeting out at 11:35 on the day of his performance, late night worship session inside, in all caps, the Alberta Legislative Building Rotunda. Here's the clip. I mean, it was reasonably good singing, but, and again, here's the problem. It is not the presence of a Christian performer in the middle of the legislature singing. Honestly, I don't think most people care about that. And you can't say that there is no space in the legislature for religion. They still do in the Alberta legislature prayers. Now, I would be happy to make the argument that any member of any faith who's not, I don't know, a bigot or an espouser of hate or a manipulator of the people who work with them in their own spiritual areas. Um, if they want to have the a little session service, whatever, in the rotunda of the legislature, I don't care. Where I do care, and where I think most people start to care, is when it's a bigot who says bigoted things, who has all kinds of problematic views. But it raised the question: how the hell did this guy get inside the legislature at 11:30 at night? The legislature is closed then. How did he get inside the legislature? And on Monday, we started receiving a boatload of DMs about the lady in this frame of the video. There were a lot of people who were suggesting, hey, we think that might, I know her. I recognize her. I'm pretty sure she's the wife of a minister of the crown, not a minister of the church. Very different things. We have to, like, the minister of uh, energy or education or child and family services. Um, we have ministers for many different things. They're not religious ministers. It's confusing. But minister of the crown, we think she's a wife of a minister of the crown. Now, we did a little bit of digging, and we were pretty sure we were able to piece together who it was. And so, in all good faith, we reached out to that minister's office. We reached out to their press secretary, because this is the kind of thing that we definitely didn't want to be wrong about. And we wanted to try to engage in good faith with the government to see if anybody would give us any replies. As we've learned over the last couple of weeks, they don't like to reply to us at all. They don't like to answer any questions that we have. They certainly didn't answer any of our questions that we put forward about the whole skybox scandal and the hiring of the nephews of the guy who's the CEO of the company that's at the center of all of it. They didn't reply to any of our emails on there, despite the fact that we sent them to like 7 press secretaries. And in no big shock to us, they did not reply to our email inquiries about this. And fundamentally, that's because this is a bad faith government. But it didn't take until midday on Tuesday that mainstream media was able to confirm that it was, in fact, Cyril Turton who had opened the doors of the legislature. And there's a lot to unpack here. But before we start to unpack it, I just want to, that's not a video freeze frame. And I just really want to take a second to appreciate that this is this is the photo that CTV chose to go with. The story was by the Canadian Press, but this is the photo that CTV chose to use for their story on this. And this is the problem here, because the comment from Turton said that he didn't believe that he broke any rules by leading the tour. So after Sean Foyt had done his little blowing of horns with Artur Pawlowski, the Coots insider, he decided to take Sean on a tour of the legislature on the inside and have him have this little late night session. In his statement, he said he didn't break any rules by leading the tour, but acknowledged that such a tour happening outside of usual business hours isn't approved practice. Although there's no policy preventing an MLA from doing this, I recognize this is not usual procedure. I've been in communication with the Speaker's office and understand the appropriate measures to take moving forward. The headline, he will follow the rules going forward. But this is the problem. This guy is a minister of the crown. He is an elected official. It's all good and well to say, I'm going to follow the rules going forward. But one would expect the person in charge of vulnerable children in the province of Alberta, to perhaps exercise a little judgment and not try to give late night tours of the legislature to begin with, let alone tie themselves and give that tour to somebody who makes a fairly good living, by all accounts, punching down on LGBTQ2S plus youth punching down on access to women's health. It's not just that he broke the rules and he gave a late night tour that he wasn't supposed to. It's that he chose the person for whom he was going to break those rules to be somebody who openly espouses hate, who the rest of Canada, by and large, said, we don't want anything to do with this guy because of how hateful he is. That's the person that Cyril Turton decided to tie his wagon to. So the excuse about, well, I won't do it in the future is at the very least a very weak sauce excuse, but the failure of judgment that was on display with this whole thing is staggering. It's absolutely staggering. And if it wasn't for the rest of the things that we're going to talk about for the rest of the episode, in normal times, you would expect a minister to either resign or be shuffled out of cabinet for something like this. But Cyril Turton is probably thanking his lucky stars or the dumpster fire that is Alberta politics for the fact that there were very quickly, this was Tuesday, in just a couple of days, there were bigger stories that were going on. So let's talk about them because we got to talk about COVID again. Nobody wants to talk about COVID. Everybody would just like if we did the things appropriately so we didn't have to talk about COVID. But we got to talk about COVID. And the reason why we got to talk about COVID is because the UCP has announced multiple iterations, kind of retconned their new COVID vaccination policy. Now, this all goes back a little while. This goes back to June 13th, because on June 13th, the UCP initially announced, hey, everybody, we've had to take over responsibility for procuring and making sure that everybody gets vaccinated. And when the feds are doing it, there's a lot of wastage. We didn't like that. It didn't come out of our provincial pockets. There's only one taxpayer, and we don't want to see that kind of wastage going forward. So we're making some changes. And there were some big concerns about some of those changes. To start with, they announced that there were going to be four phases of the COVID-19 vaccine program. Now, again, it's important to highlight that when we're talking about the COVID-19 vaccine, this is something that has been put in place only for COVID-19. This is a change only for COVID-19. Phase 1. Through Phase 1, provincially funded COVID-19 vaccines will be available free of charge to residents of senior supportive living accommodations and home care clients. Phase 2. Through Phases 2, 3, and 4, to prevent significant waste, the COVID-19 vaccine will only be available through public health clinics. Community pharmacies will no longer be administering COVID-19 vaccines. In Phase 2, provincially funded COVID-19 vaccines will be available free of charge for those 6 months of older with underlying medical conditions or compromised immune systems or in congregate living accommodations. Albertans on social programs, i.e. AISH, income supports, and individuals experiencing homelessness. In Phase 3, COVID-19 vaccine will be available to all Albertans 65 years and older, but they got to pay for it. Albertans in Phase 3 will be required to cover the full cost of the vaccine. Work is underway to determine what the final cost will be per vaccine. Phase 4. Through Phase 4, remaining COVID-19 vaccines will be available to all other Albertans. Not all other Albertans. Let me read that again because this gets important real fast. Through Phase 4, remaining COVID-19 vaccines will be available to other Albertans who will be required to pay the full costs of the vaccine. Now, this created a lot of questions. And one of the biggest ones was, who are other Albertans? One of the other biggest ones was, wait, you're going to make healthcare workers pay for this? Now, full disclosure, obviously I have a little bit of bias in this as I do work in healthcare. So yeah, I've got a bias in this. But it's absolutely bonkers that the government would say, hey, you know what? All of the people whose job it is to be the pointy end of the spear in dealing with COVID cases, they're going to have to pay for their own vaccination. They're just going to have to pay for it out of pocket. We're not going to protect healthcare workers like that. There's a significant amount of blowback. The Health Sciences Association of Alberta was able to convince the UCP to change their ways. But this is where it gets kind of weird, because the rules kind of changed. So when they announced healthcare workers are now also eligible for COVID-19 immunization as part of phase 1, offering the vaccine to healthcare workers protects vulnerable patients and maintains a strong workforce, and ensuring the health system can continue delivering safe, effective care. Those eligible for the COVID-19 vaccine free of charge in phase 1 includes, but all residents of continuing care homes and supportive living accommodations, home care clients, individuals 6 months of age and older with underlying medical conditions and compromised immune systems, as recommended by the NACI, healthcare workers, individuals experiencing homelessness, individuals 65 and older receiving the adult seniors benefit. So we went from a policy, well, no, we're not going to give it to healthcare workers. One of the healthcare unions had to step in and be like, you really, really should. And then they said, oh, okay. Now, at this point, if you haven't figured out that this is not a policy that has been designed by experts, this is not a policy that has been designed with public health in mind, it should be pretty clear that's the case. Because given that, I don't know, we just went through a pandemic, it should be pretty easy to figure out that vaccinating healthcare workers, especially given that some of the people to whom the initial round of vaccines were first made available to free of charge during the beginning of the pandemic, that's an easy lesson to take away. But apparently that wasn't a lesson that was included in the drafting of the policy. But just in case I'm not putting a fine enough point on it, the government of Alberta has again, since they announced that healthcare workers were going to be getting that, they retconned their own website with the policy. Here is two screenshots. The screenshot on the left is a screenshot from a week and a half ago where they announced the eligibility. In phase 2, because there's only 2 phases now, they said all other Albertans 6 months of age, phase, I'm going to kill our graphics department. The one on the right is the one from a week and a half ago. It says healthcare workers, everything I just read. And then all other Albertans 12 years of age and older. The screenshot on the left is the most recent one, where they've now said all other Albertans 6 months of age and older. So a week and a half ago, the government of Alberta effectively said 12-year-olds and under, they don't get any vaccines, despite the fact that it is recommended under the NACI guidelines. They do recommend it for everybody. The NACI recommends COVID vaccine for everybody, as long as it's not going to have any sort of negative effects on them. And that's a talk to your doctor conversation to have. But instead of owning it or taking responsibility, they just quietly changed the website after enough people said, this is messed up. Why does it say that? And again, that is another huge red flag that this policy has not been put together based on data or what's going to be best for Albertans. This is a policy that has been put together based on, we really, really, really don't want people to get vaccinated with the COVID-19 vaccine, which is wild. Because if you take a look at the raw numbers, the actual data in regards to who's getting infected, how many cases are we seeing in Alberta, and we juxtapose it or compare it with influenza, arguments for getting more Albertans with vaccinated get really, really strong really, really quickly. Now, I'm going to put this up front. You see the Premier of Alberta running around saying, well, it's not a real vaccine if it doesn't prevent the illness entirely. And that's just not true. It's not true. COVID vaccines are hugely demonstrated to prevent worse outcomes. That's their primary function. That's their primary goal. It would be delightful if we could get a COVID vaccine that causes all past, present, and future variants of a virus that mutates, but science just doesn't work that way. because you can't predict the future with that much accuracy. Let's take a look at the numbers. Because when we take a look at the number of cases that exist in the province of Alberta over the last chunks of cold and flu season, unfortunately, we just wrapped one up. So we've got some pretty recent, some pretty robust data to look at. For the 2024-2025 season, when we talk about the number of influenza cases that we saw in the province of Alberta, there were 14,705 cases. There were 3,731 hospitalizations. There were 313 ICU admissions, and 239 people died of influenza in the province of Alberta in the 2024-2025 season. Now, if we compare it to COVID-19, COVID-19 actually had fewer cases, 12,413. Some people have suggested that's a byproduct of not testing for it, but there were still 3,364 cases. There were still 209 admissions. So far on that little ranking, COVID, having fewer cases, has fewer hospitalizations slightly and fewer ICU admissions slightly than influenza. But the deaths are almost double. Influenza 239, COVID-19 took the lives of 405 Albertans in the province of Alberta in the 2024-2025 flu season. Now let's take a look at the vaccination rates, because those also get to be really, really important as well. For influenza vaccine, roughly 21% coverage, which is stunningly low, but not as low as COVID, because COVID had 13.9% coverage. Now, there will be some people who suggest, well, that's because the COVID-19 vaccine, it's just no good. People don't want it. They don't buy into it anymore. And that's just not true. The data doesn't support that. At the end of the day, vaccination for COVID, the latest studies from the government of Canada, decreases hospitalization rates by 2/3. Your odds of having to be hospitalized are 2/3 less if you get vaccinated than if you don't. That should be a huge selling point. The problem is not that the vaccine doesn't prevent worse outcomes. The problem is that we have a government that has gone out of their way to make sure that the vaccine is not available, that it's not easy to access, and they have done absolutely no work in regards to a public education program that would ease people's fears using real communication, real science in regards to why getting vaccinated is so important. There is a lot of bad faith actors who are presenting themselves as experts, and I want to be very, very clear. I'm not presenting myself as an expert on any of the COVID things. What I'm suggesting is that the experts should be allowed to write the policy, and the experts should be allowed to create programs that are going to properly educate people in ways that they can hear the information. This is one of the things that outgoing Chief Medical Officer of Health, Mark Joffe, highlighted in his very first public appearance after he left office. One of the biggest things that he emphasized in his presentation was that we have done a terrible job, which he attributed to political reasons, not evidence, not science, not the data, political reasons. We've done a terrible job of educating people and meeting them where they are. And when you trace where does the money come from, where does the authorizations come from, all the way up the tree, it lands straight at the government's front doorstep. It lands at the premier's office. It lands in cabinet. And people are dying because of it. But just in case the deaths aren't convincing enough, let's do some back of the napkin math. The cost of admissions per day, as per CIHI, averages a hospital admission costs around $5,000 a day. The average length of admission for COVID is 10 days. That's based on an article from the CBC. That means a single person being admitted to the hospital with COVID costs on average $50,000 per person. So if we do the math backwards, we take a look at those ICU numbers that I was talking about earlier, just ICU admissions, $10.5 million in costs. And if we go to hospital admissions, even if we just figure 2 days for how long somebody with COVID has to be admitted to hospital, obviously it's going to vary. It's not an exact science. We're dealing with averages here. We're talking about $16.8 million in healthcare costs. In total, we are talking about $26.8 million in healthcare costs for people who have to be hospitalized or admitted to the ICU. This is in the presence of an environment where there's a vaccine that can cut those numbers by 2/3. And that is not in any way, comparing it to influenza earlier, is not in any way to suggest, oh, well, we should be giving less of a priority to influenza, because influenza kills fewer people, but it had almost double the uptake of the vaccination rate. It strongly suggests that higher uptake equals fewer tragic outcomes and more money saved in healthcare. So regardless of how you look at it, if you look at it purely in the, well, dollars and cents, we're going to save healthcare a lot of money if we allow people to get vaccinated for free. And if you're concerned about wastage, sure, charge them if they don't show up to their appointment. That's fine. But if somebody shows up to their appointment because they want to do their part, there's no reason why we should be charging people for that. We should be encouraging people to do that, and we should be celebrating it when people do. But that's not the government that we have right now. We have a government that instead has significantly other priorities. So let's get into it. On August 12th, 2025, a UCP press secretary named Garrett, I'm going to guess it's Kaler, just a guess. I'm basing it on the hate preacher. Garrett Kaler retweeted the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. The Canadian Civil Liberties Association was raising concerns about the UCP's book ban, which we covered in depth on our live show in Edmonton. And if you haven't listened to or watched it, yeah, you really, really should, because I'm not going to relitigate all of that. But what the Canadian Civil Liberties Association said was Alberta has recently adopted a ministerial order that effectively bans all school libraries books like George Orwell's 1984 and Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. Garrett, oh, he wanted to weigh in. He did. Good little press secretary that he is. Retweets and tags the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. This policy is not about books like 1984, The Handmaid's Tale, as they don't have the same graphic sexual content as the books in question. Can Civ Lib? This is a blatant lie. Now, you have to first wonder, has Garrett read any of either of those books? Because in 1984, there's some violent talk that occurs and some other things that I'm not going to get into here because I can't control whether or not kids are watching this show. Handmaid's Tale. I mean, the whole premise of the book is effectively rape. So I feel like maybe Garrett should read that one. So that's Garrett's take. No, it's not about these books. Now, this came after multiple groups raised concerns that the UCP's book ban policy, which the minister signed, kind of, was far too vague and sweeping and would capture classic books. Well, on Thursday, we and a good number of other folks received multiple copies of a working list put together by the Edmonton Public School Board. And sure enough, the sweeping ban policy, which was mandatory for school boards to follow and implement by October 1st, captured classic books. 226 were outright banned in schools for being sexually explicit, with another 60 or so banned from any school with kindergarten through grade 9 students in them. Now, We're talking about books like A Brave New World, A Handmaid's Tale, 1984, The Color Purple, Jaws, Atlas Shrugged, and many more all made the list. So I guess the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, who I don't know, maybe have a little bit more experience with assessing the risk and harm to civil liberties than I don't know, chippy little press secretary. Guess they were right. Guess a lot of people were right about their concerns with this legislation. In the face of the release of these two lists, because let's be clear, there were two lists that were leaked to everybody. There was a list of the explicit books that have to be removed from all schools, and there was a list of the non-explicit books that have to be removed from any schools that K through 9 kids are in. So we're talking about a great whack of books that have to be removed from all schools because they're considered to be explicit, like The Handmaid's Tale or Jaws or It. And then we're also talking about another, I think it was like 26, 27 books on top of that have to be removed from any schools that have K through 9 kids in it. Because heaven forbid, they might stand close to the book. And I don't know. I don't know what would happen. So Nicolaides released a statement. Children should not be exposed to content like oral sex, sex toy use, or child molestation, and that is why we created this policy. The ministerial order is clear that school libraries are not permitted to include library materials containing explicit sexual content. Non-explicit sexual content may be accessible to students in grade 10 and above, provided it is age appropriate. We are aware of a list. Edmonton Public School Board has created books being removed from all libraries accessible to K through 12. This list does not differentiate between students grade 10 and above and other younger students. And I just want to go ahead and say, yeah, it did, because there were two lists. So the fact that the minister's office would release a statement without even knowing the facts first, I don't know, by maybe calling up the EPSB or something before they issued a public statement, the fact that they got that fundamental piece wrong is just another little thing that we can stack on this tower of incompetence. We asked Edmonton Public to clarify where these books were selected and pulled, and we will work with them to ensure standards are accurately implemented. Implication being that the standards weren't accurately implemented. We did not provide this list to EPSB. It's all EPSB's fault, is the subtext here. Alberta Education will be reviewing the list and working with all school boards to ensure the policy is being implemented appropriately with the intent of ensuring young kids are not exposed to sexually explicit books. So you see, it was always about the graphic depictions. It's not like there's anywhere in the order that explicitly states that it's text as well. It's not like that's literally B section in the definitions of the ministerial order that Demetrius Nicolaides himself kinda signed. Depiction means a written passage, illustration, photographic or digital image, video, or audio file. So let's be crystal clear. And anybody can go read the ministerial order. It's still, for now, available on the government website. It's very, very clear. This was written to include the written word. The notion that this is only about graphic images is proven false literally in point B of the government's own document. And to get an idea of what falls into the explicit sexual content, there's a bunch of different things. But there's one particular piece that I want to highlight. Anybody can read this, but there's one particular piece that I want to highlight. Contact of a sexual nature between the genitalia, mouth, hand, finger, or other body part with the clothed or unclothed genitalia, pubic area, buttocks, anus, or if the person is female, the breast of another person. So if a book includes a statement like, he touched her breast with his hand, by the government's definition that they wrote, even if she was wearing a sweater, and it was consensual, by the government's definition, that is sexually explicit and has to be removed from all schools. They're the ones who laid out the very particular definitions. They're the ones who laid out the very particular timelines. Nobody in the government gets to try to spin this as being, oh, well, we were really just talking about those. It was the really bad pictures. Let's go back to those really bad pictures. Hey, who's going to show those really bad pictures, everybody? Let's get those bad pictures out there so everybody can see them. And it ignores the fact, as we talked about in our live show, that in schools, children are supervised. There's librarians, there's teachers. If a kindergarten student is hanging out in a K-9 library and there's no adult supervision going on, there are far bigger questions to be asked. And nobody is advocating for kindergarten students to have access to materials that isn't age appropriate. Nobody's making that argument, except for apparently the government of Alberta. This is what they have decided they're going to hang this thing on, is that there are people out there who want these kids to see this stuff, and nobody does. Nobody does. So they wrote the rules, but that's just the tip of the iceberg with the rules. And unfortunately, we've seen this playing out this weekend in real time over social media, because if we take a look at what the definition of a school library is, a school library means any dedicated library space in a school, including a learning commons, a classroom collection, or any similar collection, but does not include a library governed by the Libraries Act that is located in a school building. Now, what the last bit refers to is if there's a library that is a public library that is attached to a school, which is a thing in some places. The public library doesn't get affected by these rules. But a classroom library that a kindergarten teacher has put together, more often than not, with their own money, buying books that are going to engage kids in reading and instill in them a love of reading, that library counts as a library under this act. And you might be thinking, well, if these books are in that kind of library, it's totally unacceptable. This ministerial order is not limited to just those, because this ministerial order puts some pretty big responsibilities on teachers and schools and school boards. A school authority is required to implement the following standards for the selection, availability, and access of school library materials. The school authority must not select for inclusion in any school library or make available to any children or students in a school library materials containing explicit sexual content. So again, they're going out of the way to repeat themselves in this ministerial order. We're using the definitions that they used. The school authority must not permit any children or any students enrolled in a grade or level below grade 10 to access school library materials containing non-explicit sexual content. Again, that's what we just said. The school authority may permit students enrolled in grade 10 or in a grade or level above grade 10 to access school library materials containing non-explicit sexual content if such content is developmentally appropriate for the student accessing the material. And here's where the rubber really meets the road in regards to those classroom collections. The school authority must review its collection of school library materials on a continual basis to ensure it complies with these standards and the school authority's policies and or procedures pursuant to these standards. The school library authority must establish and maintain a publicly available listing of all school library materials. So we got to have a publicly available listing of every single book that's in every single kindergarten classroom, that every single kindergarten teacher has spent their own money buying these books to instill that love of reading in these kids. A school authority staff member must supervise the access of school library materials by children or students to ensure that they do not access school library materials that they are not permitted to access, which is the rules anyways, and why it's so insane. Because if we're going to say, hey, we've got these rules in place, none of these books can exist anywhere that kids might be exposed to them, and it's inappropriate as determined under the ministerial directive. We're taking all the books out. Nothing you can do about it. But we also want to make sure that teachers do the job that they were doing anyways and making sure that kids aren't exposed to age inappropriate stuff. So we trust teachers to make sure that kids won't be exposed to age inappropriate stuff, but we don't trust teachers to make sure. It's all so confusing. And this is the problem with this act. This is the problem with this rule. It's poorly thought out, it's contradictory, and it holds schools and school boards and teachers to standards that they have to hit by October 1st. And unfortunately, the unintended consequences, which seems to be a recurring theme with this government, are tragic. Posts like these are cropping up over social media all over the place. Today, I wrapped up all of my bookshelves and closed my classroom library for the start of the school year. Why? Because the government of Alberta's new ministerial order demands that I need to create a digital catalog of all of my classroom books to be accessed by anyone. I have over 1,000 books in my classroom, all purchased by me and collected over my 13-year teaching career. They are well-loved and high-quality texts. They are not on the banned list, but I cannot have them available unless they are in a digital catalog. To create that would take me days of time that I do not have. Now I will have to start my school year explaining to my kiddos why they cannot read their favorite Elephant and Piggy, Dogman, Magic Treehouse, Franklin, Fly Guy, and so many beloved works. I've never been more ashamed to be Albertan. I have never been more angry with our incompetent government. If you have the time, please, I beg you to email your MLA. I cannot teach in a classroom like this. And this is not an isolated incident. Today, I've been told that we aren't allowed to let kids choose books or bring books from home in our schools. No free reading, no silent reading time or listening to reading time, no library time to choose books. I can read aloud to them. That's it. Not until all of our library and classroom library books are cataloged and deemed appropriate by October 1st. I am so sad and angry. I have to tell students they can't read to themselves. If you think this is wrong, please contact your MLAs, the education minister, and the premier. I want to be excited for this school year, but right now I'm disgusted and sad and angry, as that teacher well should be, as any reasonable Albertan well should be. And we've seen a lot of folks are trying to advance the idea of, the teachers are being performative. They're not. This is literally what's required of them. This is what the government and Demetrius Nicolaides, who kind of signed the order, said they absolutely had to do. And they did not provide a list of books that they wanted banned because they were too afraid to. They farmed out the responsibility of determining what books would meet the standards that they wrote onto every single individual school board with no consistency whatsoever. And there's over 60 of them in the province of Alberta. So you'd better believe that we're going to see some different approaches. We're going to see some different lists. We're going to see all sorts of problems. And at the end of the day, because the government didn't think this thing through, because they were pandering to a small group of people that, again, referring back to the Live Edmonton show, claimed that they took up this torch because they couldn't accept that their own kids were gay. Couldn't be that their kids were just gay. Couldn't be that their kids were just who they are. Their kids were captured by the evil education. For real, the clips in the show. And there were no extra resources that the government provided for this monumental task of cataloging every single book in every single classroom across the province of Alberta. And we're going to get to how egregious that is in just a minute. But before we do, there were some responses. On Friday, Minister Nicolaides had himself a little press conference. Wanted to talk about something else, but the conversation very, very quickly moved towards the book bans.
Do you object to the books that are on that list?
So I'll be having some more conversations with Edmonton Public Schools. Again, our primary interest with the ministerial order is to ensure that that books that contain graphic depictions of sexual acts are provided to children in an age-appropriate way. So I do have some questions about how some of these titles were selected, and I'll be talking more with Edmonton Public.
Okay. Were you surprised to see this list? I mean, like this is your policy, obviously. This is your ministerial order. They seem at least to be following your direction. Do you feel like there's misdirection here?
I want to get a better understanding of how these books were selected and what mechanisms and method Edmonton Public Schools has used. So I'll be getting some more information from them shortly.
Great, thank you.
Oh, so much responsibility being taken there. So refreshing. Do you object to the books? I have some questions about the how they did the things. Do you think that there maybe was a problem with the direction? Was there maybe some misdirection? Oh, I don't think that it's anything that I could be responsible for. I can barely sign a piece of paper and date it correctly on my own. Presumably, maybe even with some supervision. But it wasn't just Nicolaides who had himself a press conference on Friday. Danielle Smith also had herself a press conference on Friday. And the reason why I front loaded all of the stuff, all of the details about the order, all of the fact that it was so incredibly simultaneously vague and prescriptive, simultaneously general and specific, was because knowing that is critically important to being able to decipher the bullshit that the Premier of Alberta is about to shovel up.
So we ask school boards to use their discretion to identify books that might not be age appropriate for elementary school children. And then and Edmonton Public is clearly doing a little vicious compliance over what the direction is. And so if they need us to hold their hand through the process to identify what kind of materials are appropriate for senior high school students, what kind of materials are appropriate for junior high school students, and what kind of materials are appropriate for elementary school students, we will more than happily work with them to work through their list one by one so we can be super clear about what it is we're trying to do. We are trying to take sexually explicit content out of elementary schools that is inappropriate for me to show on the television news at night, and so it is inappropriate for 7-year-olds to see. That's what our objective is.
But that's not what the stated goal was. And it's not the tools that were used. They're going back to the same trope of, oh, but it's the 7-year-olds in these graphic books. We don't want them to have access to these graphic books. The order was written the way that the order was written. And if it was written in a vacuum, that is the responsibility of the people who wrote the order. That is the responsibility of the people who kind of signed the order. That is the responsibility of the people who issued the order. And all of that leads directly to the Premier's office. The fact that she allowed this ministerial order to leave her government when it is in the state that it's in is not an indictment of any school board. It's an indictment of the quality of work that the government of Alberta is producing whilst they're trying to ban books. But this is where we get again into a little bit of morphing into a pretzel by the Premier of Alberta, because on one hand, it's really about the graphic. It's about the kid. We want to keep the graphic images out.
We trust the judgment of our school boards, and that's because we do have a more decentralized system. And they've identified books that, in their interpretation, may have problematic content. And so my education minister has pledged to work with any school board who might be confused about what it is we're trying to accomplish, so that we can go through and we can identify which school books are appropriate for elementary, which are appropriate for junior high, and which are appropriate for high school. I think that they've overreached on this policy. They've obviously put books on there that there was never any intention of having them target those books, but I think we need to exercise a little judgment here. I think we made it super clear, the things that prompted this policy, and if we need to be a bit more graphic, there's lots of other images, but that's the point. Graphic images depicting the kind of acts that I just showed in the video are not appropriate for elementary school kids. That's our starting point, and if we need to refine the policy with the school boards because they're not understanding it, then we will go through that with them.
It's about the graphic images. Oh, we don't want those graphic images. It's all about the graphic images, don't you know? That's why, again, depiction means written passage, illustration, photographic or digital images, video or audio file. So no, it's not about the graphic images. You don't get to just reposition it because this bomb that you built blew up in your face. It's not allowed. The government of Alberta issued very clear, super clear instructions on what books must be banned. And then they were shocked to find out that's a lot of books. But it was their intention. It's really their intention. Even if it was their intention to target these 4 books that were predominantly LGBTQ+ plus books, these graphic novels, even if it was their intention to do so, they're still the ones who wrote the order. They're still the ones who, in effect, made the law. Imagine and suggesting that school boards should have done a better job of interpreting their law, their ministerial order. They should have done a better job of, we wrote very specifically, these were very specific things that would result in books being excluded and having to be removed and banned, but they should have really, they should have interpreted it better, despite the fact that we were so specific. Imagine going to a traffic court and arguing that the speed limit was 50, and what you decided to do was go 75. But despite the fact that the speed limit is 50, and it's very clearly labeled as 50, and you knew that the speed limit was 50, despite that fact, you believed that the intent of those traffic laws was to prevent people from getting into accidents. And see, I didn't get into an accident, therefore, I didn't break the law. Imagine, if you would, what the judge would say to that. And again, it's important to realize that this is not just one school board. Now, Daniel Smith just said it's about the graphic images. It's really, we're focusing on the graphic images. We don't want to really talk about the written word, but of course there is some written words.
Is there any potential of changing or tightening up some of that wording in the order?
Yeah, I mean, if there is some lack of clarity, we'll make sure that we're going through with clarity. But let's be clear, like, we don't want 50 Shades of Grey being in the schools either. That's clearly pornographic material. So let's be clear that there are certain things that make a reference to adult behavior that are perfectly within bounds, but then there are books that are in a genre written for pornography, and that is probably outside the bounds. So I think most people, I didn't see 50 Shades of Grey on there, thank heavens. It means they're already not in the school library. So we've already demonstrated that the school boards do have some discernment. They know that there's a difference. And so I think that we're seeing a little vicious compliance here. I think they're being I think they've been overly aggressive at what they've put on there, and it helps us launch a conversation about when these books should be introduced at what grade. And I think that parents want to be involved in that conversation. So we'll work with them and any other school board that's having problems interpreting the minister's direction.
So you see, again, we get back to that. Well, there's the really bad books, the really bad written books. So I guess it's not just about pictures, but there's those really bad written books. But, the school boards, they've done a really good job of keeping those really bad written books outside of the schools, the ones that have no value beyond titillation. They've done a really, really good job of that. So I don't know why they're having all of these troubles all of a sudden. I can't imagine what the changed variable in this equation could possibly be. Out of the gates, Daniel Smith admits in that clip, school boards have been doing a great job of keeping out stuff that doesn't have value. It's not getting in front of age-inappropriate kids. She's saying it right there. But, there's this group of these 3 ladies, and they were so angry. And that's what it boils down to. And it's really, really unfortunate because the subjective nature of what we're talking about really got on full display when Danny was asked about one of her favorite books.
I just wanted to ask about, some of those other classic texts.
And no, it's not a book ban.
Pardon me, sorry?
It's not a book ban.
I just wanted to ask about this list here. One of the books on the list was Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. I know in the past you've said that Rand is a hero and a guiding light of yours, documented as far back as the 2010 and 2012 elections. Just any thoughts on that book being removed from this list, and any other classic texts that are concerning to be taken away?
I didn't read Atlas Shrugged until I was 22. I had a friend in grade 10 who read it. Maybe we should make it mandatory reading in high school, because it is a pretty influential book, and I think it does really articulate how important it is that we value our entrepreneurs and we value a free enterprise economy. So maybe that should give you some idea. Maybe you don't read passages of Ayn Rand in kindergarten reading time, but maybe when you get to be in junior high or high school, the level of understanding about the concepts in there are absolutely appropriate for school children of that age.
There's the reason why Atlas Shrugged was removed is because there are passages in that book that meet the threshold of what was described in the ministerial order. So now we have Danielle Smith saying, well, I don't know why she said I didn't read that book till 22, but I had a friend who read it in grade 10. They turned out great. Oh, it should be mandatory for all kids. Maybe that gives you an idea of where I stand. And again, this goes back to the subjective nature of this government's approach to this thing. It's not quantifiable. It's not based on expertise. It's not based on what experts are saying about what is or isn't age appropriate for what ages. It's not trusting that teachers and librarians have the ability to make sure the kids are accessing the appropriate materials for them. It's not about any of that. It's about some of these books. A few pages from some of these books made some folks uncomfortable. And in order to appease that segment of Danielle Smith's base, we went with sweeping directions that are going to have catastrophic impacts on kids going back to school on Tuesday. Now, there's some kids who are already back in school, but most kids are starting to go back to school this week. And the fact that teachers have had to cover up their libraries, how do you explain that to a kindergarten student? How do you tell a kindergarten student or a grade 1 student or a grade 2 student that they're not allowed to read any books because the government sucks at their job this hard? How do you tell that to kids? I honestly don't know. But it wasn't just Danielle Smith and Nick Ladies who weighed in on the book ban this week, because Handmaid's Tale was also on that banned list. And Margaret Atwood absolutely entered the chat. She did so very quickly on, I think it was Friday. Hi, kids. Handmaid's Tale, the book, not the series, has just been banned in Edmonton. Don't read it or your hair will catch fire. Get one now before they have public book burnings of it. And it's funny, but also sad. But that was not the only tweet that Margaret Atwood threw up. And I'm going to tell you, this one's a little bit long, but I'm going to read it because it is so tragically on point. Here's a piece of literature by me suitable for 17-year-olds in Alberta schools, unlike, we are told, The Handmaid's Tale. Sorry, kids, your Minister of Education thinks you are stupid babies. John and Mary were both very, very good children. They never picked their noses or had bowel movements or zits. They grew up and married each other and produced 5 perfect children without ever having sex. Although they claimed to be Christian, they paid no attention to what Jesus actually said about the poor and the Good Samaritan and forgiving your enemies and such. Instead, they practiced selfish, rapacious capitalism because they worshipped Ayn Rand. Though they ignored the scene in the Fountainhead where welcomed rape is advocated because who wants to dwell? And also, that would involve sex and would de facto be pornographic. Well, it is kind of, eh? Oh, and they never died because who wants to dwell on, death and corpses and yuck? So they lived happily ever after. But while they were doing that, The Handmaid's Tale came true, and Danielle Smith found herself with a nice blue dress, but no job. The end. Hard to top that. At the end of the day, The UCP wrote the policy in a way in an attempt to be clever. They wrote rules that required all of the books to be banned, but they were too cowardly to own the policy and just create their own list. They didn't want the responsibility of saying, okay, so there's these 4 books. Oh, they really make some folks uncomfortable. So we're just going to say nobody gets to see these books. Nobody gets to read these books in public school, in any school. We're just going to say that these books, they're very, very bad. We do not like them. And so they are banned. They didn't want to do that because they didn't want to be the ones to have to deal with any reasonable person saying this is censorship. We're stepping into some very dark periods in history if we're going down this road. They didn't want to have to be the people to deal with all of that. So instead, they created all of these micromanaging rules and fired them off to over 60 school boards and said, do with it what you will, but if you don't get to where we need you to be, undefined though that is, by October 1st, we're coming. It was a cowardly move. There's no other way to say it. And all of this comes at a time when teachers are not having the best go. This has been a reoccurring theme on the show for quite literally years. We have been talking about the problems in public education. We have been talking about the underfunding. We have been talking about the amount of free work that teachers give. And we're going to be doing a little bit of a thing on that in the coming weeks about how much free time teachers give. Not because they're getting paid, because for a lot of the work, they aren't, but because they're teachers who want to see kids be successful. They want to see kids' minds grow. These are the people that are among some of the groups that should be supported the most, because these are people who genuinely want to do their job for the good rewards that is their job. This is why they are so overworked. It's heartbreaking. And if you talk to any teacher, they will tell you the vast majority of teachers are just a couple of bad days away from walking away from the whole profession entirely. And unfortunately, this sort of thing with the book bans only makes the bad days worse. And this is why we're seeing teachers and school boards saying, we do not have the resources to meet the demands of this government. And so we just have to pull all the books because we can't have these catalogs built because we're in the middle of trying to go back to school. And we've also got all this extra testing that you've said that we have to do. And we've got this onerous new curriculum that you've thrust upon us in the absence of expert advice that we have to try to navigate and deliver on a timeline that is exceedingly difficult to hit. In all of this environment, we now have an extra layer of instability. But I got to be honest with you, when I talk about this next topic, I don't look at it as anything other than good. It's about time, because teachers deserve better than what they're getting. Back in June, teachers voted to authorize strike action by a margin of 94%. 94% of teachers said that the deal that the government was putting forward was nowhere near good enough. It didn't address the pay shortages that they've had for years. It didn't bring them up to market value. And it didn't address classroom size or complexity or the working environment. And that's a really important piece, because teachers care so much about the kids that are in their classrooms. There aren't a whole lot of people who, if you said to them, hey, we're going to give you really miserable working conditions and we might take away your staff room because we need the classroom space. And we're not going to pay you very, very well. In fact, your raises for a bunch of years are going to be non-existent because economic hardship and all that. But it's going to be challenging. It's going to be miserable. Also, there's going to be some kids in the classrooms who are going to have a lot of different complexities, a lot of different assistance that's required. You're just going to have to deal with that and make sure that everybody gets a world-class education nonetheless. What do you say? There's not a lot of people who are going to be like, I'm going to do that because it sounds like fun. The people who are signing up for that job are people who are saying, I want to make sure that these kids are okay. I want to contribute to the betterment of society. I want to help move us forward. That's who's signing up for these jobs. And it's really important to keep that in mind for the rest of this conversation. The vote that the teachers had gave them the option of calling a strike within 72 hours of notice within 120 days from that vote. So teachers can say, we're going on strike. You've got 72 hours to make whatever plans that you need to make, but we're going on strike because the classroom conditions, sizes, and complexity are not being addressed by this government in a meaningful way. And the UCP has refused to budge in any meaningful way on the wages or the other issues. On August 20, and I want to, before we get to the statements, I want to just shuffle things. I want to just hit some raw information here, because there's some information that's really important to keep in mind. When we take a look at percentage gains between Alberta teachers with Alberta's average weekly earnings and inflation, since 2012 to 2025, teachers' wages have gone up a whopping 6.3%. The average Alberta weekly earnings has gone up 26%. And the index for inflation has gone up 33.9%, which means teachers are in effect making 27% less money than they were in 2015, because things have gotten that much more expensive. There's some other information that's really important to keep in mind as we work our way through this discussion. This is from, and I'm not even making this up, the Fraser Institute. And if you know anything about the Fraser Institute, they tend to lean on the conservative side of things. They're not known for having really progressive values, but they released some information just recently where they talked about spending per student on public schools by province. Alberta ranks the worst in 2022-2023. We are spending the least amount of money on kids in public schools in the entire country. But where it gets really unfortunate is when you take a look at the spending adjusted for effectively inflation by province. Alberta is one of the provinces where we are actually spending less. The drop is massive. Now, of course, the Alberta Teachers Association, they did their own version of a graph, and they made it more fun. Look, they used colored pencil crayons to show that Alberta is the last. But that's because that's what teachers do. They took a dry, boring graph from the Fraser Institute, and they made it fun and colorful and easy to understand, because that's what teachers bring to the table. They make information engaging and digestible. I show you, here's the Fraser Institute graphs. I'll do this again. There's the Fraser Institute graphs. Those are lines. Oh, look at that. There's multicolored pencil crayons, and the colors match the numbers, and it's all... Anyways. The ATA released a statement where they said the bargaining had reached an impasse. And it was a very professional, well-written statement. They talked about a June bargaining date. CTBC attempted to reach a negotiated agreement with TIBA, which is the group of school board associations, authorized people, providing a comprehensive proposal. The items in the proposal attempted to address the concerns shared by members during the member information meetings around salary and learning conditions. Specifically, the proposal on salary maintained the retroactive pay for the 2024-2025 school year, moved the implementation date for the unified grid to September 1st, 2025, and added 1% to the top of each grid. The proposal on learning conditions would have required hiring 1,000 new teachers during each year of the agreement for a total of 3,000 net new teachers by the end of the 27-28 school year. While TIBA lacked the mandate, which they had to be given by the government, The parties still engaged in discussions about this. During this week's negotiations, TIBA provided a comprehensive counterproposal to the June proposal, in which TIBA essentially agreed to the teacher hiring proposal. However, they remained immovable on the salary recommendation in the mediator's report. So they're spelling out the government is not meeting them halfway. They're willing to hire some new teachers, but they're not willing to move on the wage piece. On August 28th, both Nate Horner and Demetrius Nicolaides issued a statement on the potentially impending strike. It was not nearly as well worded or professional. We're deeply concerned and disappointed with the decision of the Alberta Teachers Association to break off negotiations with so much at stake and to close and so close to a reasonable settlement. So already we're painting who's the bad guy here. The ATAA has been maintaining their ongoing public campaign saying that teachers, families, and students want better classroom conditions. We heard their bargaining concerns and carefully considered how we could best support students, teachers in their classrooms. They have been offered what they asked for in part. They have been offered what they said was needed. On August 26th, TIBA made an offer to the ATA that included hiring 1,000 more teachers every year for the next 3 years at an estimated total cost of $750 million over the term, an offer that provides the exact request the union made in June of 2025. A 12% salary increase over 4 years was also offered, as well as an additional increase that would improve the salaries of 95% of their members. On August 27th, the ATA's bargaining team rejected this offer and suggested that a contract with fewer teachers would save money and that funding would be funneled into an even higher and that funding could be funneled into even higher salaries, which is not, according to the ATA, what was said. The union strategies and tactics have been exposed and called out. We cannot sit idle while the public, parents, and students are manipulated in supporting a union that has shown its primary interest in diverting supports away from the classroom to further drive up teacher compensation. So the ATA has been very respectful. They have been very professional. And the UCP is clearly trying to union bust and behave like spoiled children. So I don't have a problem calling out the UCP saying they're behaving like children. They are debating as to whether or not the people who are providing education and care to kids across the province deserve to be paid just a little bit more. They said it themselves. It was the salary piece. That was what the whole problem was. What did Nate Horner have to say at the press conference that they had on Friday?
Hi, Colleen Underwood, CBC. I'm just a bit confused because it sounds as though the salary has been an issue for a while. I remember doing this story earlier this year, and the teachers were saying that the bargaining unit representing the employers wasn't able to actually, they didn't have the power to lift the 12%. And so it seems like it's the same issue. Are you guys just, is it a matter of you're not going to budge on the 12%? I assume that's the biggest stickler right now.
Yeah, happy actually to turn it over to Minister Horner to answer that for you.
Sure.
Thank you for the question. The way we look at all public sector bargaining is that we want to be at market. So I wouldn't say that they didn't have the power to lift that. They didn't have the data to lift that because that puts them well within market. We're looking at the Ontario West comparator provinces. We don't want recruitment and retention challenges. We want all of our occupations to be paid the going rate. And that's what the data shows. In this instance, we're talking about a 12% general wage increase for every teacher. 95% of teachers would get more, up to 17%. That's what's on the table. So I guess my only comment is, you know, we've looked at this from a proactive way. We don't want labor unrest. We want kids in schools. We've tried to come with a fair offer. That's what's on the table. And depending where this goes, I don't see that offer changing because the data doesn't show that it should. And after the press conference I held yesterday, I don't think Alberta can afford to be an outlier. This is what happened with public sector wages in Alberta for the last 15 years. And that's why we saw a series of zeros and ones. We want them to be at market. We have no appetite to be above market. I just would leave that there.
So even there, he's admitting, yeah, there were a bunch of years where teachers got absolutely no increases whatsoever. No teachers got any kind of raises. They got zeros, they got ones. It was very, very low for a long period of time. Now, so we just want to make sure that we're doing what all the other provinces are doing in regards to how the other provinces are increasing. Heaven forbid that we want to attract more teachers, because I don't know where they think they're going to find 1,000 new teachers if they don't have the work environment to support those teachers. But there's a more fundamental question. There's two more fundamental questions that have to be asked. First of all, why are we not aspiring to be the destination province for professional excellence? Why are we not doing that? That would seem to me to be the best way to make sure that Alberta becomes the most successful province that it can ever be. Let's make sure that the professionals that we're attracting here are among the best and the brightest, and they're coming here because we will pay them appropriately to do so. The UCP has no problems paying out huge amounts of money for people on other roles, but when it comes to the people who are forming the minds of our youth in conjunction with their parents, well, we don't want to pay them any more than we absolutely have to. Why would we want to do that? And the irony is, this is coming from the party that lit their hair on fire when a pandemic prevented kids from going back to school or from being in schools. They went to political war in this province. They got rid of Jason Kenney in this province because they wanted the kids to be back in school no matter what. And Jason Kenney put the kids back in school against medical advice by many metrics. So this is a situation where they could very, very easily make sure that no strike happens. The party that believes that kids should be in school no matter what, even if they get sick, even if they bring home illness that gets their family members sick, even if it spreads illness in the community, those kids absolutely, no matter what, need to be in school. We'll spend millions of dollars on masks from friends happily in order to make sure that those kids are back in school. But whoa. You want us to pay the teachers? Hold on a second. Let's not get crazy here. The hypocrisy is really quite remarkable. And the question came up about the possibility. I talked earlier about how the teachers had voted with a 94% margin to give themselves the power to provide 72 hours notice and initiate strikes. And they don't have to be province-wide. They can be targeted. They can be localized. That's up to the ATA, how they're going to play that card out. The equivalent power on the other side is a lockout. And this is where the government would say, yeah, so we're just going to lock all the teachers out. We're going to be the ones to say nobody's going to school this week because the teachers won't come to a deal. They were asked whether or not that was a power they were considering using.
I'd like to hear if you have ruled out entirely the possibility of a back-to-work order. Can you tell us if you will not consider a back-to-work order under any circumstances here? That would be question one.
I'm not committing to anything other than, we have a fair deal on the table. We expect and hope that the ATA comes back to the table and we can reach a negotiated settlement. I don't want to speculate about what may happen in the future. We have tools at our disposal, so do they. But I hope that this is concluded in a negotiated way and soon.
Sorry, that clip is about a back to work order, not the lockouts. The lockouts comes next. The back to work order would be the government making a law that says that teachers have to go back to work. And that turns into a constitutional law problem fairly quickly. Things get complicated really, really fast. It's not a rabbit hole that anybody should want to be going down. When it comes to the lockout, that was a power that they did give themselves because it says Alberta votes, and there's some nuance to be had with the language here. Technically, it wasn't Alberta as a province. We didn't vote as the electorate for lockout option. What happened was that group of school boards they each get one representative. They all voted, and a majority of them voted to give themselves the power to lock teachers out. So it's an important distinction to make. It doesn't mean that there's going to be a lockout. And quite frankly, it doesn't mean that there's going to be a strike either. There's a lot of uncertainty. And for parents who are getting ready to send their kids back to school, that's not great, because it doesn't mean any of these things are going to happen. But what it does mean is that the government has failed on two pretty important fronts. It has failed to negotiate a deal that not only pays teachers appropriately, but provides incentive for the best and the brightest teachers to go, boy, one day I want to work in Alberta. And second, it has failed to negotiate a deal that addresses classroom complexity, class sizes, and certainly per student funding. Because you can hire all of the teachers that you want, but if you don't make sure that the per student funding is appropriate, you're not giving all of those teachers the resources that they need in order to make sure those students' needs are met. And if that's what you're leaving them with, you're forcing them, all of those new teachers, to take on all of that extra work, not because they're being paid to do it, because they won't be, but to do it because they care about those kids and they care about those outcomes. And that's just about as manipulative and, quite frankly, predatory a view towards an employee that I can just about imagine. I said at the beginning of this segment that I was glad the teachers are finally standing up for themselves and for their students. And that's what they're doing, because education in Alberta is an unfunded dumpster fire. And it's not because teachers don't do their jobs. It's because the Alberta government under-resources public education in just about every way possible. And they should be ashamed. The fact that Demetrius Nicolaides, the Minister of Education, who would be the one issuing the order, presumably, for back to work, if that's what was going to happen, the fact that he handed it off to Nate Horner speaks to how grossly over his head he is with this portfolio. He couldn't execute on the book bans, couldn't get that job done properly, turned it into a gigantic dumpster, couldn't even sign the order correctly, which is a joke that we've been making a lot of hay out of. But at a certain point, it stops being funny and starts being sad. And he couldn't even answer the question as to whether or not he would try to force teachers back to work against their will. One other little thing that we got to hit on before we call it a night, then we're going to call it a night. We haven't. We had to take a bunch of stuff up to Edmonton in order to make the live show work properly, and not everything has been plugged into its correct place yet. So we don't quite have the capacity to do the open mic. Hopefully, we're going to be able to do that next week. But we got a couple other things that we're going to talk about in the meantime and in between time. One of them is, I'm only going to touch on it because we got a whole episode coming up in a day or two. Originally, I think we said we were going to drop it tomorrow. The editing's taking a little bit longer, so it might be Tuesday or Wednesday. But the Alberta Party, they went and had themselves a vote last week. It's always so hard to tell on Sundays. Is it this week or last week? A couple days ago. They went and had themselves a vote over what to do with the Alberta Party name, the brand, the infrastructure, all of the things. And the membership overwhelmingly, apparently by over 90%, voted it's time for a name change. And the number one name that they chose that they're going to be putting forward to elections Alberta is the Alberta Progressive Conservative Party or Association. I can't remember which one. Anyways, we've got a conversation with current leader of the Alberta Party, interim leader, which probably means that she'll be the last leader of the Alberta Party, Lindsay Amantea. Every time and you'll see in the interview, I get it wrong there too. We've got a conversation that we're just in the process of putting together where she walks us through how this whole process with the rebooting of the Progressive Conservative Party of Alberta using the body of the Alberta Party happened and what's going to be happening next. Sounds like and no surprise to anyone, sounds like they've got 2 MLAs under their belt very, very shortly. But there might be more coming. It's hard to say. We talked to Lindsay to find out a little bit more. Look for that episode in the next few days. Other than that, a couple of minor housekeeping announcements. This one's kind of exciting. We announced it at the Edmonton show, and we're going to re-up it now. We've got a whole brand new merchandise line. And this isn't because we're going to make mad bank on it. By any stretch of the imagination. I don't mind saying that I was in Vancouver a couple of weeks ago recording an episode with this really cool guy that we're going to be bringing in the next few weeks. And went to see a concert while I was there. Paid way too much money for the merch, for the clothing there. We're not doing that with our merch. We've got hoodies, we've got t-shirts, we've got hats, we've got all of the things. Got a couple of different logos choices that are available to you. You can get all of that at the breakdown abmerch.ca. We've partnered together with some wonderful folks at a company called Oddities that are taking care of the entire back end, which is fantastic because I don't have the bandwidth. So if you want to pick up yourself, the prices are entirely reasonable because we're making next to no money. I think we're making like $1 or $2 on the shirts. They literally came back like, "Are you sure?" But all of the things are there at the breakdown abmerch.ca. Rest of the plugs that are coming in with the last little bit here. If you appreciate the kind of content that we like to produce here at The Breakdown, then you can sign up to be one of our Patreon supporters at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. You can do the monthly little thing. You can set your own amount. You get early access to our interview episodes, and you get the warm, fuzzy feeling in knowing that you're helping us to continue making Danielle Smith moderately annoyed with us. Enough so that she allegedly tried to get me fired. So it's a good way to push back just a little bit. If you're not into the long-term commitments, then we also are accepting e-transfers at info@thebreakdownab.ca. You can use that same email address if you have little things that maybe you want us to know about. Maybe you're in a school that has had to close down a library and you want to share something anonymously, then you can send it there. Any other tips, you can send it to info@thebreakdownab.ca. And there's that. And that's it. That's the spiel, y'all. Thank you so much for tuning in. For those of you that have on a long weekend, and for those of you that are listening to the audio version or watching it after the fact, thanks for choosing to spend almost 2 hours on our little effort here. And with all of that being said, before we go, there's one more thing that I absolutely have to do.
How's your BS detector evolved over time?
I tend to be pretty trusting.
You need it sometimes. You need that last little bit of funny at the end of a dirge like this show. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We're going to be getting back to our regular schedule fairly quick here. And in the meantime, and in between time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and keep the conversation going.